They say memory is a filing cabinet, orderly and indexed, but mine is more like that box of spare parts I kept under the workbench in Birmingham. A jumble of brass springs, stripped screws, and rusted gears, all fused together by the damp. Sometimes, when the nights are quiet enough, I reach in and pull out a piece, trying to remember which machine it belonged to. Was it the escapement of a grandfather clock, or the bolt assembly of a Ley-Enfield? No. For it starts with the sound, not the roar of the artillery that came later, and it stays with you in the ringing of your ears, but the sound of an escapement lever. Tiggle, tiggle, tiggle. A heartbeat of brass and steel. In the factory before the world caught fire, I lived in that rhythm. My hands, stained with graphite and whale oil, knew the tension of a mainspring better than they knew the touch of a woman. I was a factory worker, yes, but in the evenings, I was a surgeon of time. I fixed the things that people forgot. A watch that stopped when a father died. A mantle clock that lost 5 minutes every day. I made them perfect again. I imposed order on a chaotic universe, one gear tooth at a time. Then the sky over the Midlands turned the color of bruised plums, and the Luftwaffe rained fire on the bull ring. The order was shattered. I remember standing in the rubble of what used to be the bakery, watching the dust settle on a child's crushed tricycle, and realizing that mechanics couldn't fix this. You cannot reassemble a city with tweezers. That was when the ticking stopped, replaced by a howling wind that hasn't left my head in 60 years. I opened my eyes and the cool, oil-scented air of the workshop was gone. It was replaced by the taste of chalk and old pennies. The desert, Alamein. The heat here wasn't a temperature. It was a physical weight, a heavy, wet blanket made of lead that pressed down on your helmet and squeezed the breath from your lungs. It was 1942, or so they told us. The days bled into one another, distinguished only by the intensity of the glare and the number of flies trying to drink the moisture from your tear ducts. I looked at my hands. They were the same hands, long fingers, steady, unblemished, but they were filthy. The dust of the western desert is not like English dirt. It is fine like talcum powder, abrasive as diamond dust. It gets everywhere. It finds the creases in your skin, the lining of your stomach, the darkest corners of your mind, and it finds the glass. My thumb moved in a small, rhythmic circle over the lens of the telescopic sight. I did this without thinking. It was a tick, a nervous flutter. The scope was my eye. Without it, I was just another man with a heavy stick in a vast sandbox. With it, I was a precision instrument. But the fear was always there, scratching at the back of my throat. A single grain of silica, hard and sharp, could scratch the coating. A scratch would catch the sun. A flare of light would reveal my position. And then the darkness. I was terrified of the dark. Not the night was my friend, but the permanent dark. The blindness. If I couldn't see, I couldn't fix, I couldn't protect. I thought of my brother, barely 6 years old, sleeping in a shelter in Birmingham. If I went blind here, who would watch the horizon for him? I pulled the piece of chamois leather from my breast pocket. It was gray now, saturated with the grime of the campaign, but I treated it like holy vestments. I breathed on the glass, a small cloud of moisture that vanished instantly in the furnace air, and wiped. Gentle, circular, methodical, venge. The voice was gravel grinding on iron. Sergeant Miller. He didn't look at me. He was watching the shimmer of heat rising off the hardpan to the south, where the German lines were just a suggestion of geometry against the horizon. Miller was a man who seemed to have been carved out of the trench wall itself. He smelled of tinned beef, stale sweat, and the acrid, metallic stink of cordite that never really washes off. "Sarge," I said. My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the vastness of the desert. He held out a slip of paper. It trembled slightly in the hot wind. Coordinates. Intelligence wants eyes on a sector near the depression. They think Rommel is moving heavy armor, but the flybuzz can't see through the haze. I took the paper. The numbers were scrawled in pencil, smudge-proof and final. "You go tonight," Miller said, finally turning to look at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, sunken into a face that looked like cracked leather. "Alone. Just look, Arthur. Don't be a hero. We have enough dead heroes. We need live maps. I looked at the coordinates, then out toward the enemy. The desert was a sea of beige and ochre, featureless to the untrained eye, but full of malice. Somewhere out there, between the scrub bushes and the rocky outcrops, were men who spoke a different language, but checked their watches just like I did. Men who lubricated their bolts and cleaned their lenses. "I'll need extra water," I said, folding the paper into a small square and tucking it into my tunic, right next to the picture of my family. "Take what you need. Just bring yourself back." Miller spat into the dust, a glob of brown phlegm that sizzled on the baked earth. "And Finch, leave the clockwork alone. You're not fixing anything out there. You're just breaking things." He walked away, his boots crunching on the loose shale. I sat back against the sandbag wall, the heat radiating through my uniform. I picked up the rifle again. I checked the action. The bolt slid back with a fluid, oily resistance, smooth, silent, perfect. I closed my eyes and prayed, not to God, but to the laws of physics. I gave the lens one last wipe. The sun was beginning to dip, turning the sky the color of a fresh bruise. The ordinary world of the workshop was a million miles away. The desert was waiting. Like me, a little mechanic of the dunes. I am here. I am watching. It was a reminder that I was an intruder in a hunting ground. The enemy wasn't just a concept or a line on a map. He was a man with a finger on a trigger, looking through glass just like mine. I waited for the sun to reach its zenith, lying under my camouflage net, sweating until my uniform clung to me like a second skin. The heat warped the air, turning the horizon into a dancing liquid mirror. I drank sparingly, letting the tepid water sit in my mouth to wet my tongue before swallowing. When the sun finally began its descent, lengthening the shadows and giving the world depth again, I moved. I crawled up the limestone ridge, inch by agonizing inch. The rock tore at my elbows, but I didn't feel it. All my focus was on the crest. I reached the top and slowly, imperceptibly, raised my head. I brought the binoculars to my eyes, shielding the lenses with my cupped hands to prevent a reflection. I was looking for tanks. I was looking for artillery emplacements, for supply trucks, for the jagged silhouette of the 88 and flak guns. I adjusted the focus wheel. The blur resolved into sharpness. My breath hitched in my throat. Below me, in a natural amphitheater shielded by high dunes, there was a camp, but there were no tanks. There were no artillery pieces. In the center of the depression stood a large canvas tent, and draped across its roof, unmistakable even in the fading light, was a flag, a white square, a red cross. It was a field dressing station. I watched, frozen. I saw men in field gray uniforms moving with urgency. I saw stretchers being carried. I saw the flash of white aprons. They were the enemy. They were the monsters who had dropped fire on Birmingham. But through the magnified glass, I didn't see monsters. I saw a man stumbling, his arm draped over a comrade's shoulder. I saw a doctor, his sleeves rolled up, stepping out of the tent to light a cigarette, his shoulders slumped in exhaustion. I lowered the binoculars, the grit grinding against my skin. The slip of paper in my pocket felt heavy, like a stone. I was supposed to call down fire on coordinates. I was supposed to be the eyes of destruction. But the clockwork in my head jammed. I wasn't looking at a machine of war. I was looking at men trying to fix what had been broken. I exchanged the binoculars for the rifle. The Enfield was heavy, a familiar weight that usually anchored me to the earth, but today it felt like I was lifting a lead weight. I slid the bolt forward, chambering around. The brass casing clicked into place, a sound of finality. I settled the stock into the pocket of my shoulder, my cheek welding to the wood. I became stone. I became the sand. I became nothing but an eye. Through the scope, the world narrowed. The shimmering horizon and the endless desert vanished. There was only the circle of light and the fine black lines intersecting in the center. I dialed the range, 300 yards. Wind negligible. I watched the dance of the triage. It was a factory floor of flesh. They worked with the same frantic rhythm we did back in Birmingham when the assembly lines went down and the foreman was screaming. But they weren't building anything. They were trying to stop the unraveling. A truck rumbled in, kicking up a cloud of choking dust. Two men pulled a stretcher from the back. I saw the uniform before I saw the face. Khaki drill, one of ours. I felt the old anger spark, the heat in my belly that I used to keep me warm on cold nights. I waited for the brutality. I waited for the rifle butt, the shove, the indignity of capture. Instead, I saw hands, gentle hands. A German medic, his tunic stained dark with dried blood, took the British boy's weight. He lowered him onto a crate. He cut away the trouser leg with a pair of shears. He didn't look at the uniform. He looked at the wound. Then the earth shook. A stray shell, miles off course, whistled in and slammed into the dune 50 yards away. The ground jumped. I didn't blink. My eye was welded to the glass. I saw the German medics dive. Not away, not for cover. They threw themselves over the stretchers. Gray uniforms blanketing khaki. A human shield against the jagged metal rain. The dust settled. The German medic stood up, dusting off his knees. He checked the British boy, saying something I couldn't hear. Then he reached into his pocket. A packet of cigarettes. He lit two. He placed one between the lips of the man I was supposed to kill. The gears in my mind ground to a halt. The propaganda posters, the screaming speeches, the black and white newsreels. They dissolved. The machine I had built inside myself, the one that ran on hatred and duty, threw a rod. Then movement. A staff car. An officer stepped out. Iron cross at his throat. Maps under his arm. A colonel, perhaps, vital intelligence. Ahead of the snake. He stood in the open, talking to the chief surgeon. He was motionless. A statue. A perfect target. I shifted my aim. The crosshairs drifted from the tent to the gray tunic. The post centered on his chest. Exhale, pause. My finger found the trigger. I took up the first pressure. The spring tightened. The sear engaged. It was the work of a second to end him. To do my duty. To protect the streets of Birmingham from men like him. But through the lens, I saw his eyes. He looked tired. He rubbed his face with a hand that shook. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man. Just a gear in a broken machine, grinding itself down. My heart hammered against the ribs, shaking the sight picture. Kill him, the voice said. Fired. The trigger did not break. The hammer did not fall. I let the breath out, a long, shuddering exhale that vanished into the desert wind. I eased the pressure on the metal. The spring decompressed. The officer turned and walked into the tent. He lived because I willed it. He lived because for the first time, I was not a weapon. I was a human being. I pulled the rifle back. I capped the scope. I crawled backwards down the ridge, sliding through the sharp shale, leaving the ghosts behind. The hike back to our lines was silent. The stars above were cold and indifferent. I had no coordinates to give the artillery. I had no kill tally to report to the lieutenant. I carried something heavier. I carried the truth. The desert is a long way away now. The sand is gone, replaced by the smell of oil, brass, and old mahogany. My hands are wrinkled. They have liver spots and thick veins, but they are steady. They have to be. I pick up the tweezers. I reach into the heart of the grandfather clock on my workbench. The escapement is tricky. It governs the release of energy, the rhythm of time. It is a world of perfect order. If a gear is broken, I replace it. If a spring is wound too tight, I ease it. It makes sense. It follows rules. War does not make sense. I never told the lads in the battalion. They wouldn't have understood. They saw monsters. I saw the men inside the monsters. And once you see that, you can never really be a sniper again. You can pull the trigger, yes. You can hit the mark, but you feel the bullet tear through yourself, too. I look at the clock face. It's a machine, just like the factory back in Birmingham. But people, we aren't machines. You can't just swap out the parts when they break. You can't unwind the time you've lost. The harvest of that war was a generation of broken springs and stripped gears, and no amount of polishing will ever make us run smooth again. I hold a small brass cog to the light. It glints just like the officer's iron cross did in the setting sun. We are all built of the same pieces. In war, you're trying to see only the machine, the enemy. But that day, my eyesight had never been clearer. I saw a man. The most important target is the hatred in your own heart. The greatest victory is choosing not to fire. I place the final gear into the clock. It clicks into place. The pendulum swings. The heartbeat resumes. This memory is a shard of glass I carry. Help me pull it out. Subscribe to keep this history alive.